fellas, this week the UFC are off to China for Minyang Zhang versus Johnny Walker. Probably one of the most hydrogen bomb versus coffin baby, unstoppable force versus movable object fights I've seen in a long time at UFC Shanghai. You know what? For a fight night, it's a pretty decent card. If I had to rate the card, I'll give it a 7 out of 10. I think it is quite top heavy. The main card's very, very clean for a fight night. The prelim do have a lot of like these unranked, unknown fighters on the card from Asia, but it's a solid card overall. I'll give it a 7 out of 10 for a fight night. Back in China, good main event. And we'll start off with the first fight. Yizha versus Westin Wilson. Now, Yizha, this guy had a massive run in the regional scene, becoming a champion in the local scene. Comes through from the road to the UFC, which tends to be a bit of a theme for Asian fighters. He goes 2-0 on road to the UFC and loses his UFC debut to Zhang Li. He goes back to road to the UFC, gets 3 more wins on road to the UFC with 2 finishes, and then loses his next run at the UFC in his second run in the UFC. Going to be taking on Westin Wilson, who has had nothing but finishes in all of his wins. This guy, again, had a massive run in the regional scene, got finished in his UFC debut by Joannis Brito, then got finished by Gene Silva, so he's had a pretty tough start to his career, but he's coming off a submission win in his most recent fight over Sergei. The style of Yizha, he's a tough-ass dude, is Yizha. He's one of these guys, great chin, tough-ass dude. He's kind of made for dogfights, and even in his last fight against Gabriel Santos, he showed that. And Gabriel Santos is a tough guy. I remember he ate a massive head kick in the first. And he has got pretty good grappling. Nothing crazy, though. He wants to take the fight to the mat and implement the grappling, but he's not like a crazy grappler. And for Westin Wilson, he's a really low-level fighter. There was a long time when people were kind of saying that Westin Wilson might be the worst fighter in the UFC. Well, that's obviously not the case because he submitted Sergei, but he's very low-level. His striking's awful. I think he's been trying to work on it with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, but he does tend to implement the grappling of a BJJ kind of fight. So I'm going to go with Yizha to win this one by decision. Again, this isn't the highest level fight, which is why it's so early on in the card, but I'm basing this off the performance of Gabriel Santos. Yizha, he looked good again. Well, he got lost comfortably, but he didn't look too bad against Gabriel Santos. And Gabriel Santos, I think he's one of the best unranked fighters in the featherweight division. He didn't perform that bad. He looked pretty tough. I think his stand-up's way better than Westin Wilson's. I think the grappling ability is better than Westin Wilson's. Maybe Wilson has some of the BJJ ability that he can implement. I don't see him pulling off a submission, so I see a bit of a fight, a bit of a messy fight, a bit of striking, a bit of grappling, but I just think Yizha's the better fighter. He's performed better against Gabriel Santos than Westin Wilson has, even though, to be fair, Westin Wilson is also a tough guys, Joannis Brito and Gene Silva. I just don't think he's looked that good. Very low-level fighter. I think Yizha gets this one done by decision. Then we have Hayisaer versus Gage Young, a short notice fight. As I think he was supposed... I forgot who Hayisaer was supposed to fight, but Gage Young is coming in on short notice, I think, again. Anyway, Hayisaer had a solid run in the regional scene, only losing once. Comes through and gets a good win in the Contender Series, and then loses his UFC debut, and then loses his next fight in the UFC as he gets knocked out by Borjas. He then goes he's now 1-1 in his last 2 fights as well, losing to Nicholas Morta in his most recent fight as he takes on Gage Young, who had a big run in the regional scene with a bunch of finishes, lost his first fight in the Contender Series to none other than Quillen Salkilled. He then gets a KO on the regional scene and then on short notice faces Evan Elder a couple of months back and loses that fight too, so he hasn't had a great start in the UFC so far. The style of Hayisaer, he gets hit quite a lot. Does Hayisaer, his defense is quite questionable, but he has got a solid chin and recovery. I remember in one of his fights, I think it was his most recent fight against Nicholas Morta, he got an ass whooping in the first round and still looked pretty solid in the second round too, so he's got good recovery, good chin. He's more of a volume striker. That kind of tends to be the style of Hayisaer, but he just tends to get the worst out of dogfights. He kind of ends up in dogfights a lot, like a lot of these Asian fighters do, but I don't think it's kind of built for him because he never really tends to get the better out of these dogfights. And for Gage Young, he also tends to be another scrappy, low-level fighter. I don't really know if Gage Young's UFC worthy. I know he's had quite a tough run, short notice against Evan Elder, and Quillen Salkilled isn't the easiest run, but he didn't look too bad against Quillen Salkilled, just a bit scrappy. He seems to be pretty heavy-handed. He's got a lot of KOs in the regional scene, and there's a couple of times when he landed some big shots over Evan Elder, but he's nothing crazy. Just another one of these regional kickboxers that seems to be pretty good for the regional scene, not so good for the UFC. I'm going to go with Gage Young to win this one by decision, though. It's a tough one to say. I feel like Hayisaer just doesn't really seem to improve, and he's fought low-level fighters and not performed the best. I think it is going to be a bit of a scrap in this fight, but I don't think Gage Young is too bad. He fought Quillen Salkilled in the Contender Series, and if you know Quillen Salkilled, that guy's a beast, and he didn't perform too bad against Quillen Salkilled. He's able to perform, even in his fight with Evan Elder. I think it was a 30-27 to Evan Elder, but I feel like the fight was a lot closer than what the scorecard showed. So I do think Gage Young is UFC worthy. He's not a high-level fighter, but he's clearly good enough on the regional scene. And for Hayisaer, He just doesn't really tend to improve. And he's been one of these scrappy fighters who doesn't really tend to get the better of scraps. You've also got to take into account that Jung's fight with Evan Elder was on like a week's notice as well, so he didn't really have too much time to prepare. And he still kind of made it competitive. So, again, bit of a coin flip, but I'm going to go with Jung. He's looked good against solid opponents. I'm going to pick him to win this one by decision. Then we have Rongzhu versus Austin Hubbard. I swear a lot of these Asian fighters are genuinely just like copy clones of each other, where they're all just like very similar in the sense that they just come to scrap every single time. But Rongzhu, massive run in the regional scene, becoming a champion. Starts his UFC career going 1-2, where he gets submitted by Bahamondes, but he also pulls off a finish over Brandon Jenkins, and then goes back to the regional scene after getting cut from the UFC, picks up another win, and then goes to Road to the UFC. Gets 3 wins on Road to the UFC with 2 finishes, and then after that, in his new run in the UFC, he's 1-1, winning his most recent fight at UFC 312 as he takes on Austin Hubbard, who had quite a big run in the regional scene, becoming a champion in LFA, then just became a bit of a win-loss fighter in the UFC, a bit of a decision merchant, so the UFC cut him. He then gets 2 more wins on the regional scene, becoming a champion, also beating Julian Lane. Then comes from the McGregor versus Chandler season on the Ultimate Fighter, gets 2 wins on the Ultimate Fighter, gets another UFC contract, and so far he's 1-3 in the UFC, and that 1 win was controversial, and he has been finished as well by Kurt Holloway. The style of Rongzhu, he's another one of these Asian scrappers. A lot of these Asian fighters tend to be very kind of copy-paste. Another Asian scrapper, solid stand-up on the feet. He's kind of like the Asian Max Holloway. His most recent fight against Cortes was really funny. He was just scrapping, pointing to the canvas. He's one of these Asian scrappers that is just really fun to watch. And for Austin Hubbard, he's like a bit of a control-heavy fighter. He likes to get the control time. He likes to kind of backhold a lot and kind of backpack people. Not the most interesting fighter to watch, and he's just not a great fighter. He's a bit of a weak striker. His stand-up was never that good. He got his pieced up by Marco Medeiros in his most recent fight, and he's just not really dangerous anywhere the fight goes. And you look at his UFC run as well. Like I said, on his new UFC run, he's 1-3, and that 1 win over Figlak's controversial too. So I'm going to go with Rongzhu to win this one by decision. I'm kind of bought on the hype, but not bought on the hype, but I kind of rate Rongzhu a little bit. You know, he had that fight with Chris Padilla, but he got injured badly in that fight, which is why it got stopped. And he looked really good in his most recent fight against Cody Steele. And Cody Steele was a massive favourite, and he was beating the shit out of Cody Steele on the feet. So I kind of rate Rongzhu quite highly. I think he's a great striker. And for Austin Hubbard, he's just never looked good. Losing to Kurt Holloway, losing to Hernandez, losing to Marco Medeiros, barely beating Michael Figlak. It's not even like he looks dominant on the regional scene. I just don't think Austin Hubbard's UFC worthy. I think the fight stays standing, and Rongzhu just picks him apart. I could even see maybe like a late finish from Rongzhu, because the guy does walk forward and tend to scrap, and we've never really seen anything significant from Austin Hubbard on the feet. So I'm going to go with Rongzhu to win this one by a pretty comfortable 30-27 decision. I don't see there being too much grappling in this fight. We just saw Rongzhu against like a much better grappler than Austin Hubbard in Cody Steele, coming from a BJJ background, and he kept the fight standing and fucked him up standing. So I think he's going to do the same thing to Austin Hubbard. I think it's a bit of a mismatch. Rongzhu by decision, 30-27. He's a fun fighter. I think he works Austin Hubbard on the feet, absolutely overwhelms with volume strikes. Austin Hubbard shouldn't really be in the UFC. I'm going to go Rongzhu by decision. Michel Pereira is going to be against Kyle Daukus. This would have been a massive match if this was about 4 years ago. Michel Pereira had an absolutely massive run in the regional scene, gets a KO win in his UFC debut against Danny Roberts. Then after that gets 2 straight losses with a DQ over Diego Sanchez, and then puts together a massive winning streak with a bunch of good finishes over some decent names in Iho Portieri, Michel, Imadayev, and Andrei Petroski. And he kind of got the reputation for being a bit of a weird fighter. He likes to flip, he likes to get backflips. He's kind of a bit of a clip farmer, is Michel Pereira. He's always in like these highlights. He main evented last year against Anthony Hernandez, got absolutely whooped in his first main event in the UFC, one of the biggest beatdowns, and looked really bad in his most recent fight against Abbas Magomedov, where there was pretty much nothing that took place in that fight. Kyle Daukus had a massive run in the regional scene with a bunch of finishes, becoming a champion. Also coming from also getting a win in the Contender Series, even though he didn't get a contract. He's also the brother of Chris Daukus, but then he kind of got finished a lot in the UFC. He started off his UFC career getting finished by Brendan Allen, and then had a bit of a weak run after that, getting finished by the likes of Eric Anders and Roma Delidze. So he goes back to the regional scene, picks up 4 straight wins on the regional scene, becoming a champion, and now he's got another crack at the UFC against Michel Pereira. The style of Michel Pereira, he used to be very explosive with a fast-paced style. In your face, walking forward, trying to do this crafty shit, backflipping on people. Very explosive guy, and he's got like so much muscle mass as well for the middleweight division. Like I said, usually throw spinning shit and backflips. That usually tends to be the go-to. He hasn't really shown it in his last couple of fights, but at least when he was fighting cans, that's what he was doing. And he has looked awful in his last 2. Mauled by Hernandez, and he looked terrible against Abbas Magomedov. Kyle Daukus, he's a submission grappler. He wants to take the fight to the mat and pull off a submission. Very evident what his game plan is. He's a pretty talented dude. He just isn't UFC worthy. He's one of these fighters that I feel like he's too good for the regional scene, but not good enough for the UFC. And his face has been absolutely butchered. He took so much damage in his first run in the UFC. So much damage. He's an awful striker. I'm going to go with Michel Pereira by TKO in the first round. I really hope we see a bit of a glimpse of old Michel Pereira, the can crusher Michel Pereira, because it's been pretty evident when he's got to step up in competition. He looked awful. I mean, in his fight with Abbas Magomedov, he didn't look that good. So I'm hoping we see an old version of Michel Pereira, and I think he completely dominates Kyle Daukus, keeps the fight standing, and just TKOs him on the feet in the first round, because he's very dangerous. Is Michel Pereira hits very hard. Even his submission ability, his ability to like pull off a guillotine because of how explosive he is, he's good too. So I just think he's a way better striker, and he absolutely fucks up Kyle Daukus on the feet. Kyle Daukus isn't UFC worthy. He's coming in on short notice. If Michel Pereira doesn't get a finish, it's going to be a massive fall off for Michel Pereira. He's expected to win this fight, but even if he doesn't get a finish, I know he kind of likes to conserve the gas tank, and we kind of saw that in his most recent fight with Magomedov, where he was very hesitant to conserve the gas tank, but he does well when he's facing cans. Kyle Daukus is a can. I'm expecting Michel Pereira to go out there and blast through him in the first round and get the job done. I don't really see much threat from Kyle Daukus on short doses. I don't think I mean, obviously the grappling, but again, it's not like Michel Pereira is a bad grappler. He lost to Hernandez, who's one of the best grapplers in this division. So I'm going to go Michel Pereira, TKO in the first round. Yeah, just completely blasts him, runs through him. And I hope we do see that kind of explosive, like fun fighter that we used to see in Michel Pereira, the pre-Hernandez Michel Pereira. Because even in that fight with Hernandez, he nearly finished him in the first round. He wobbled Hernandez against the cage and obviously got mauled. So I'm going to go Michel Pereira, gets this one done by TKO in the first round. Then we have Lon'er versus Su Yongyu. Lon'er, another massive run in the regional scene, loses on the Contender Series and he's running the Contender Series, gets 2 more wins on the regional scene, comes from road to the UFC, picks up 2 straight wins, loses his UFC debut but got a really good KO win in his most recent fight in the UFC as he takes on Su Yongyu, who had a pretty decent run in the regional scene, becoming a champion in a couple of organizations. Again, comes from road to the UFC and is so far 2-0 in his UFC run, and he's been undefeated in UFC affiliated promotions. The style of Lon'er is an absolute scrapper. I've said that about a million times in this video, but like I said, a lot of these Asian fighters are very similar. He's just an absolute scrapper. Dude just wants to bang. He hits very hard as well, does Lon'er. Very hard hitting dude. And just a fast-paced guy. Always in your face. Always looking to scrap. Always looking to stand and bang. And he's a fun fighter. Su Yongyu, never mind, I'll find someone like you. I'm gonna go with Su Yongyu to win this one by decision. Yeah, Su Yongyu's looked pretty good in the UFC so far. Decent grappling, decent striking. Just another one of these very well-rounded Asian fighters. He's had a good run in the UFC as well. And for Lon'er could be a threat on the feet. He's a solid striker as Lon'er, but I think the grappling of Su Yongyu is going to take over. Takes the fight to the mat, implements the grappling, and even the striking of Su Yongyu. We saw in his most recent fight against AJ Cunningham, he was able to get going with a strike. And I think from a technical perspective, Su Yongyu's a better fighter everywhere the fight goes. I'd say the only advantage that Lon'er has is he's more dangerous. I don't think he clips Su Yongyu. He's looked pretty good so far. He's done a nice run. I'm going to go Su Yongyu to win this one by decision. Lonnie Kavanagh, arguably the best flyweight prospect right now, takes on Charles Johnson. Now, Lonnie Kavanagh had an undefeated run in the regional scene, comes to run the Contender Series, gets a KO win, beats Jose Ochoa in his UFC debut, and just got a good win over Felipe Dos Santos at UFC London last year, remaining his undefeated record. Charles Johnson had a massive run in the regional scene, becoming a champion, also ended up losing to Brandon Royval in the regional scene. He's had a pretty up and down run in the UFC, bit of a streaky fighter, but he's had some good notable wins. You know, he knocked out Joshua Van as well, which a lot of people tend to forget about, and now Joshua Van's one of the most hyped up fighters in this division, which is probably his career highlight. The style of Lonnie Kavanagh, he's rapid on the feet. I think Lonnie Kavanagh might be one of the fastest flyweights on the roster right now. Really elusive kickboxer, really good when he gets in the flow of things, and he's got a solid ground game too. We saw that in his most recent fight with Felipe Dos Santos, and he's an absolute dog. He can keep it technical, he can scrap. I think Lonnie Kavanagh, and for good reason, is one of the most hyped up fighters in this division right now. He's got a shit ton of potential, and he's just a really good kickboxer, and even his grappling ability is good too. Charles Johnson, he's a great output striker with a good stamina across 15 minutes. If you've got bad stamina, Charles Johnson will work you. He's got good pace across 15 minutes, good volume striker, one of the more underrated flyweights on the roster. But the problem with Charles Johnson is he can smoke great opponents like, for example, Joshua Van, and then lose to guys that he should be beating. He's super inconsistent with his performances, is Charles Johnson. 1 minute he can look amazing, champion potential. Next minute he's against a cannon and he gets finished. So He's too inconsistent, is Charles Johnson. Now, this is a massive step up for Lon'er Kavanagh. Your third fight in the UFC being against Charles Johnson, who was on a 4-fight winning streak with the win over Joshua Van and arguably won against Ramazan Temirov. It's a tough one, but I'm really bought on the hype of Lon'er Kavanagh. I'm going to go with Lon'er Kavanagh to win this one by decision. Yeah, this is a tough fight for Lon'er Kavanagh, but I think he gets this one done. We just saw Charles Johnson against Ramazan Temirov, and we saw him struggle a lot in the early rounds. Now, I rate Lon'er Kavanagh a lot. I think he's one of the best strikers, honestly, in this division. I can see him keeping up a good pace across 15 minutes. Outworking Charles Johnson, winning this fight by decision. Like I said, it's going to be a tough one because your third fight in the UFC being against Charles Johnson, a guy who's experienced, is going to be tough. But I really do rate Lon'er Kavanagh. I think he keeps this one standing, keeps it technical, outlands Charles Johnson, wins via output. I'm going to go Lon'er Kavanagh to win this one by decision. Obviously, Charles Johnson could get the massive upset, but I don't know if I mean, even in his most recent fight, like I said, took on Ramazan Temirov, and he was winning the fight later on because of the gas tank of Temirov, but early on he was getting worked. And I think if you're getting worked by Ramazan Temirov, this short kind of, short fighter with short reach in the division who isn't a great striker, just very dangerous. I think a guy who's a lot more rangy in Lon'er Kavanagh, who's a lot faster and a lot more of an elusive kickboxer with a better gas tank, can probably work you across 15 minutes too. So I'm going to go 30-27 or maybe like a 20-28. Lon'er Kavanagh, really bought on the hype. I think this guy can go far. And I think this is going to be another one of these fights where he kind of displays how good he is. And he's got a win over Halsey Ochoa too. Ochoa, I know we just lost to Azwar Mabayev, but Ochoa, again, one of these super quick, dangerous strikers at flyweight. And Lon'er Kavanagh beat him too in good fashion. So I'm bought on the hype of Kavanagh. I think he gets this one done. I'm going to pick him to win this one by decision. Diyar Nurghozhay versus Uran Satybaldiev. Now, Diyar Nurghozhay had an undefeated run in the regional scene, becoming a champion. Got a good KO win in the contender series, but got pretty easily finished against Brenton Ribeiro in his UFC debut as he takes on Uran Satybaldiev. Satybaldiev, again, undefeated on the regional scene, becoming a champion, and lost his UFC debut on short notice to Martin Badai. Both guys trying to fight to get their first win in the UFC. Diyar Nurghozhay's style, he's quite a dangerous striker, but he looked awful in his UFC debut. In his debut against Brenton Ribeiro, he looked really bad in that fight, both in the grappling and on the feet. His grappling sucks. He got easily taken down by Brenton Ribeiro and submitted, so his grappling sucks. And he's got this annoying tick as well, where he kind of like keeps rubbing his eyes, like a tick that he has when he's fighting. It's really annoying to see. He keeps like grabbing his eye. Uran Satybaldiev, he's not the most talented fighter anywhere the fight goes, but the guy just works people, always in your face, always looking to get you against the cage, always looking to make it scrappy, and he puts on a pace, and he's an absolute dog. He fought Martin Badai at heavyweight on short notice, and even though he lost the fight, he did work Martin Badai, to be fair. So I'm going to go with Uran Satybaldiev to win this one by decision. If anybody's going to get a finish in this fight, it's going to be Diyar Nurghozhay. He's the most dangerous fighter on the feet, in my opinion. I think he's got, just the more power on the feet, but I think Uran Satybaldiev going to work him. I think we're going to see a bit of grappling from Satybaldiev. If we look at Satybaldiev on the regional scene, the grappling tends to be the biggest key to victory for him, and I don't really rate the grappling at all of Diyar Nurghozhay. We saw him get easily worked in the grappling by Brenton Ribeiro. I think when it comes to the stand-up ability, I don't think he's that far ahead of Uran Satybaldiev, so I'm going to go Satybaldiev to win this one by decision. Outworks Diyar Nurghozhay, holds him against the cage, takes him down a few times. I don't think he gets the finish of a Nurghozhay, but he looked really bad in his debut, did Nurghozhay. Fought Brenton Ribeiro, got completely outworked as a massive favourite. And for Satybaldiev, he was in a new weight class against Badai, who was one of the better heavyweights on the roster, at least, around the top 15. And he actually worked Badai in some of the exchanges, roughed him up in the clinch as well. He's a bit of a scrappy guy, so I'm going to go Satybaldiev to win this one by decision. He could get finished. Nurghozhay has looked dangerous on the regional scene, but just because of how shit he looked against Brenton Ribeiro, I'm going to go Satybaldiev to win this one by decision. Then we have Nueraji versus Keifer Crosbie. Nueraji is a very dangerous dude. Only every single one of his wins are by way of KO and submission, so finish, and he's only got one loss in his career. Had a solid run on the regional scene, comes from road to the UFC, gets 3 more wins on the regional scene, all by finish, and now he's making his UFC debut against Keifer Crosbie, who started off his career with 4 wins, went over to Bellator, had a nice little run in Bellator, then had a Kingpin influencer boxing match before coming over to the UFC, where so far he's 0-2 in the UFC with 2 submission losses. The style of Nueraji, very dangerous stand-up fighter, and it's pretty evident. Hits very hard on the feet. His counter ability is really good, and like I said, he's winning the road to the UFC. He didn't even look that quick on the feet, but he was able to counter his opponent, and all it took, I think, was a right hand, and he slept his opponent out cold, bounced his head off the canvas. A very dangerous dude on the feet. And for Keifer Crosbie, He's just a boxer who throws shots hoping to land something big. Keifer Crosbie is not UFC worthy. He's a Bellator journeyman. I don't know how he's still in the UFC, to be fair. He's a very weak fighter with awful grappling. Easy to take down, easy to hit. He just hopes on landing something big on the feet because his style does tend to be boxing, but like I said, very low level fighter, would do great things in Bellator. He wouldn't even do great things in Bellator. He's a Bellator journeyman, so I'm going to go with Nueraji to win this one by KO in the first round. I feel like the UFC put this fight together to kind of build the name of Nueraji against Keifer Crosbie. He's a much more dangerous guy standing than Keifer Crosbie. And I think he finds the chin of Keifer Crosbie early on. Yeah, Keifer Crosbie's pretty shit. I mean, to be fair to Crosbie, he's not having to worry about a heavy grappler again. But I think Nueraji could pull off a submission too. I mean, Keifer Crosbie getting submitted by... I mean, Sam Patterson's a good grappler, but getting submitted by Kevin Gisette, for example. Kevin Gisette isn't even that good of a grappler, so I could see Nueraji implementing the grappling too. I really do feel like anywhere the fight goes, Nueraji's going to be better, but I feel like because of the power, because of how dangerous he is, and the fact that he's actually earned a UFC contract, look, smoking guys in the regional scene, come from road to the UFC. Keifer Crosbie's a big name in Ireland and the UFC, trying to get as much Irish fighters in the UFC, which is why he still got a contract. Nueraji sleeps Keifer Crosbie in the first round. I'm going to go KO in the first round by Nueraji. Then we've got Sumudaerji versus Kevin Borjas. Now, Sumudaerji, one of the most dangerous flyweights on the roster. The vast majority of his wins coming by way of KO. Had quite a big run in the regional scene with a shit ton of finishes. Loses his UFC debut. And then after that, goes 3-0 in the UFC with a good KO win over Malcolm Gordon. Then he gets finished by Matt Schnell. Finished in his next fight and then loses again to Charles Johnson. And then his most recent fight is picked up a win over Mitch Raposo. Kevin Borjas had a solid run in the regional scene, becoming a champion with a 100% finish rate. Comes from the Contender Series, getting a UFC contract. Then he loses to Joshua Van in a competitive fight and loses his next fight as well, where he gets his calf opened up. Then took on Ronaldo Rodriguez as quite a big underdog as well. And that was when Ronaldo Rodriguez was a big star. And then ended up beating Ronaldo Rodriguez at UFC Mexico early this year. The style of Sumudaerji, really fun stand and bang fighter with pretty heavy hands. Like I said, hits quite hard, fun fighter, looks to stand and bang and scrap a lot, but he does usually lack defense, which is why he loses. Yeah, he does kind of lack the defense to Sumudaerji. Doesn't really protect himself a lot, kind of leaves himself open. He's been knocked out a few times, well, not knocked out, but dropped a few times because of that. So I'd say that's his biggest weakness. The style of Kevin Borjas, super fast striker, even for a flyweight. He's one of these fighters at flyweight who is very quick on the feet. Super underrated hands as well. I think he looks really good. He's made it competitive with great strikers. Like I said, he took on Joshua Van in his UFC debut, and he actually made it quite competitive with Joshua Van. Obviously, Van won the fight, but he didn't look too bad and out of place against Van. In his most recent fight, took on Ronaldo Rodriguez, pieced up Ronaldo Rodriguez, dropped him, made him roll around a couple of times after he dropped him with the right hand. So I do rate Kevin Borjas on the feet, and I'm going to be going with Kevin Borjas to win this one by decision. Yeah, I think Kevin Borjas works him. I just think he's a much better striker than Sumudaerji, better boxer, more technical, more defensively sound. I think Sumudaerji's obviously got the more KO ability, but I don't think he sleeps Kevin Borjas. I don't think, he's going to put Kevin Borjas in too much danger. And he just gets hit too much to Sumudaerji for my liking. So I think we're going to see Kevin Borjas pick him apart with the boxing, work him on the feet. I do rate the striking of Kevin Borjas, especially in his most recent fight against Ronaldo Rodriguez. Well, like I said, he completely worked him on the feet. And Ronaldo Rodriguez, even though I don't think anyone thought he was going to be something massive, was a bit of a prospect in this division, was quite a big name. So I'm going to go Kevin Borjas by decision, works him on the feet, outworks him with the boxing, and gets the job done by decision. Then we've got ranked heavyweight Sergei Pavlovich against Waldo Cortes Acosta. Now, Sergei Pavlovich is one of the most dangerous fighters on the roster. 15 wins, nearly every single one of his wins by KO, and all of them coming in the first round. Started off in the regional scene with a massive run, becoming a champion in the local scene. Loses his UFC debut to Alex Overeem, and then goes on a massive run in the UFC. KO's Marcelo Gom in the first round. KO's Maurice Green in the first round. KO's Shamil Abdulmarikov in the first round. KO's Derek Lewis in the first round. KO's Tatu Ivazra in the first round. A main event against Curtis Blades, and KOs him in the first round. Then gets the interim title fight against Tom Aspinall, gets knocked out by Tom Aspinall, then he gets pieced up by Volkov, and then he's come off a pretty lackluster win against Rosenstrike in his most recent fight in the UFC. Waldo Cortes Acosta came from a boxing background before the UFC and before MMA. Really a nice little run in boxing. Started off his MMA career with quite a few finishes, becoming a champion in the local scene by beating Thomas Peterson, gets a KO win in the Contender Series, and so far he's had a pretty nice run in the UFC, notably finishing the likes of Ryan Spann and Lucas Brzezinski, and also beat Rebelis de Spain as a massive underdog when Rebelis de Spain was one of the biggest prospects in the UFC. The style of Sergei Pavlovich, he used to walk forward and overwhelm his opponents with heavy hands and crazy accuracy. Yeah, Sergei Pavlovich was once the scariest fighter in the UFC. He'd walk forward, pressure. He's got really good accuracy, really good power, really rangy for the division. He'd absolutely overwhelm heavyweights with his boxing and just TKO people. And he's, I say used to, because he hasn't really shown that in his last couple of fights. And he, like I said, he has slowed down since the Tom Aspinall fight. I feel like he's been a bit shell-shocked since that loss to Tom Aspinall. Still super dangerous, still hits very hard, and obviously still one of the better and more dangerous dudes in this division, but he has kind of slowed down a bit. Seems to be a bit gun-shy these days. Waldo Cortes Acosta, he's just a boxer. He's got a boxing-heavy approach, likes to stick and move, likes to hit and not get hit, and just simply outclasses opponents with his hands. And he's got solid wrestling too. Not one of the best in the division, but he has got solid grappling too. I'm going to go with Sergei Pavlovich by TKO in the first round. I really hope we see the old Sergei Pavlovich, the pre-Tom Aspinall Sergei Pavlovich, because in his last 2 fights, he seems so gun-shy. Like, losing to Aspinall's one thing, even losing to Volkov's one thing, but in his fight against Rosenstrike, that was supposed to be the fight where we saw Pavlovich come back and get another TKO finish, and he looked super gun-shy. We saw the wrestling of Pavlovich in that fight, but he hasn't really looked the same since that fight with Tom Aspinall, so I'm hoping that Pavlovich is going to be a bit more open to brawling now. That's what he kind of engages. He likes to brawl a lot. He likes to make his opponents engage in a brawl and just completely overwhelm them with a striking, because he has got really good accuracy and range for the division. Waldo Cortes Acosta, he has got good striking. It wouldn't surprise me if Cortes Acosta can make it competitive, but I don't know how much I rate Acosta. He took on Spivak in his most recent fight, and Spivak is not a good striker. He's got, I guess, good offensive boxing, but he wants to implement the grappling, and he made it competitive on the feet with Spivak, where Spivak actually, wobbled him a few times as well. So I think Pavlovich will be able to get the job done. If you're getting wobbled by Spivak, if you're getting caught by Spivak, I think a guy is rangy, powerful, and just overall dangerous as Sergei Pavlovich should get the job done. So I'm hoping that we see the old Sergei Pavlovich come back. The dangerous Sergei Pavlovich, the guy that was going out there and smoking people. I'm going to go Pavlovich by TKO in the first round, but he could be competitive. Like I said, Cortes Acosta isn't bad. In fact, I'd actually say Acosta's better than Rosenstrike, but it just depends on what version of Pavlovich shows up. If the gun-shy, timid version of Pavlovich shows up, it could be quite a competitive fight. If the old Sergei Pavlovich shows up, I'm expecting him to go out there and run through Waldo Cortes Acosta in the first round, so I'm going to go with Sergei Pavlovich by TKO in the first. Then we have a 5-round co-main event, one of the best co-main events this year, for a fight night at least. Brian Ortega versus Aljamain Sterling, 2 grapplers going at it. Brian Ortega, big run in the regional scene, becoming a champion, has a no contest in his UFC debut, and then after that, goes on a massive run in the UFC with nothing but finishes. A shit ton of finishes, a bunch of submissions on there as well, until he eventually gets his title fight with Max Holloway, loses his title fight with Max Holloway, then picks up a win against Korean Zombie, then gets thrown into another title fight with Alexander Volkanovski, gets butchered in the fight with Volkanovski, then gets injured against Yair Rodriguez, submits Yair Rodriguez, and lost to Diego Lopez in his most recent fight, where he got beaten up pretty badly at UFC 306 as he takes on Aljamain Sterling. Now obviously Sterling, former bantamweight champion, won the belt after fluking any over PTN, beats PTN in the rematch, then goes out there, mauls TJ Dillashaw, beats Henry Cejudo, gets knocked out by Sean O'Malley, moves up to the featherweight division, and so far at featherweight he's dominated Calvin Kattar and lost a close fight to Movsar Evloev. The style of Brian Ortega, really good submission artist. He's got pretty solid volume striking, just Brian Ortega, but he's not elite. He was never one of the better strikers in the featherweight division, but I feel like that was simply because featherweight is, has some of the best strikers in the UFC. So he has got good volume striking, but he's not elite, and he has fallen off quite a lot. He is looking a bit more flabby and blubby for the division these days. He's a bit more inactive, and his performances have been getting worse, so he's fallen off a bit. Aljamain Sterling is one of the best grapplers in the UFC. Amazing wrestling, solid BJJ. When he was a champion, he was one of the best wrestlers in the UFC, not mauling, but out-grappling the likes of Henry Cejudo, mauling TJ Dillashaw, beating PTN with the wrestling. He's really good with the grappling. Even in his most recent fight with Movsar Evloev, showcased the grappling too. And he's got weird stand-up, a bit unorthodox on the feet, throw some crafty, weird shit. Again, not a great striker by any means, but I'm going to go with Aljamain Sterling to win this one by decision. I just think Sterling's a much better grappler than Brian Ortega. I think from a submission perspective, I guess Brian Ortega's better, but I don't see him being able to submit Brian Ortega. I think Ortega's got better BJJ. We've all seen the backpacking of Aljamain Sterling, and I think one of the main reasons I'm choosing him to win this fight is because of his most recent fight with Movsar Evloev. Evloev's one of the best wrestlers in the division, and Ortega made it, and Sterling made it super competitive with Movsar Evloev. He was implementing the grappling, out-wrestling him a few times. It was a very back-and-forth wrestling matchup where Evloev eventually got the decision win, but it was super close. And in his fight before that, he dominated Calvin Kattar, and like I said, I just don't really know what I'm basing Brian Ortega off if I'm going to pick him to win. He got dominated by Diego Lopez. He submitted Yair Rodriguez, but Rodriguez has awful grappling. And his last solid performance, I guess, was against Korean Zombie. So I'm going to go with Aljamain Sterling to win a decision when I think he completely out-grapples Brian Ortega in this fight. I'm hoping it's going to be a grappling matchup and it's not just one of these weird stand-up fights where the fight cancels out and stays standing. But I do rate the grappling of Aljamain Sterling. If anything, he looks more dominant at 145 than at 135. You look at how he dominated Calvin Kattar Keifer and performing against Movsarevlev, I do think this is the division for Sterling, so I'm going to pick him to win this one 30-27. I just think he's a much better wrestler, much better grappler than Brian Ortega, outworks him with the grappling, gets the job done by decision, and I think it's 5 rounds as well, which is only going to play into the hands of Aljamain still. I don't know how Brian Ortega, who's barely making 145, is inactive, and he's been getting worse with every performance, is going to do in a 5-rounder against Aljamain still. And so, yeah, 50-40, maybe not 50-45, but a pretty clear unanimous decision win over 5 rounds for Aljamain Sterling. Gets the decision win. I'm going to go Sterling by decision. Then the main event, Coffin Baby versus Hydrogen Bomb. Johnny Walker, solid run in the regional scene, becoming a champion, comes from the Contender Series, then gets 3 straight finishes in the UFC, notably knocking out Khalil Roundtree. And then after that, goes 1-4 in his next 5 fights, has a bit of a fall off, notably getting knocked out by Corey Anderson, and main events against Jamal Hill, and gets goofily knocked out by Jamal Hill. Then he picks up a couple of wins, beats Ian Q Talaba, finishes Paul Craig, and beats Anthony Smith, has a no contest against Magomed Ankalaev, main events against Ankalaev, gets brutally knocked out, and got even more brutally knocked out at his most recent fight against Volkan Oezdemir, as he takes on Zhang Minyang, who might be the most dangerous man in the UFC right now. This guy's had nothing but finishes in every single one of his wins. He had a massive run in the regional scene, a big winning streak as well, which is where he got his UFC contract. Well, actually, he went to the road to the UFC, brutally knocked out Tuco Tacos to get a UFC contract. Then he knocked out Brenton Ribeiro, knocked out Ozzy Diaz, and most recently knocked out and TKO'd Anthony Smith in his most recent fight in the UFC. And he's now on a 12-fight, first-round KO streak in one of the most dangerous fighters in the UFC right now. The style of Johnny Walker, he's a tall, rangy kickboxer with a very explosive style. Yeah, Johnny Walker, tall, rangy for the division, really long legs, quite an explosive style. Does Johnny Walker kind of throws a lot in every shot he throws, but he notoriously has a very dodgy chin and weak defense. Doesn't really defend himself properly, leaves himself open to get caught, and it doesn't help because that's paired with a really bad chin. He's one of the most chinny fighters in this division, and he just doesn't really improve. He's never really improved as Johnny Walker. He's never really improved the wrestling, hasn't really improved the defense. He kind of looks the same in every single one of his performances, which is why it's so easy to figure him out. Minyang Zhang, very, very heavy-handed dude. Clearly one of the most dangerous fighters in the UFC, shown by his record and the fact that he has kind of got that touch of death, which not many fighters in the UFC do have. And he walks forward and has perfect timing and accuracy. That fight with Anthony Smith, it was like the Terminator. Walked forward and just battered him with elbows, cut him open with elbows until he eventually got the TKO win over Anthony Smith. He's kind of got a bit of a careless style, does Minyang Zhang, but it seems to work. And I'm going to go with Minyang Zhang by KO in the first round. That shouldn't be a surprise. This has to be one of the most obvious layup fights, one of the most obviously matched fights the UFC have put together for UFC China. They have put one of the most chinny fighters, one of the most vulnerable fighters in the UFC against one of the most dangerous fighters in the UFC in Minyang Zhang. I don't think there could have been a more favourable fight for Minyang Zhang, for China, than Johnny Walker, but I'm going to go with the hometown guy, Minyang Zhang, to get the job done. It shouldn't really take an in-depth breakdown for this. Johnny Walker, vulnerable, bad defense, very chinny. Minyang Zhang, good accuracy, Terminator, hits like a fucking truck, very dangerous. He's going to walk forward, he's going to find the chin, and he's going to brutally knock out Johnny Walker, win the first round. Again, shouldn't take an in-depth prediction, but it does kind of suck because I like Johnny Walker a lot. He's one of the better personalities in this division, but Minyang Zhang, very dangerous dude. This is his step into the top 10, and this is where he gets a top 5 fight after this. I'm 99% confident. The only chance that Johnny Walker has to win this fight is simply if he clips Minyang Zhang with something before Minyang Zhang clips him with something. And I really don't see that happening. I'm going to go with Johnny Walker getting knocked out cold by Minyang Zhang by KO in the first round. But those are my predictions and breakdown for UFC Shanghai. Let me know your thoughts on this card, and if you agree or disagree with the predictions that I made, let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching.